Hello students, this is Dr. Shabana Begum, Associate Professor in the Department of Zoology, Maharani Science College for Women, Bangalore. Girls, in my previous class, I elaborated on the morphological structure of Palemon, and today in this session I am going to talk about the structure and functions of different appendages and also the structure of a typical appendage, that is a biramous appendage, which is a small topic of unit 1 pertaining to BSc Zoology second semester, called Type Study of Palemon. And the content of this particular session is to learn the structure of typical appendage and also the structure and function of various appendages in case of Palemon. Learning objective. So after this lecture, the students will be able to learn the structure of typical appendage, that is called biramous appendages, and also learn and understand the different types of appendages and their functions in the prawn called Palemon. Here is the repetition of the first slide of last session, where you can see the systematics of Palemon malcolmsoni once again, and you can also have a look at the various appendages which are serially arranged one behind or one after the other, all 19 pairs, which will be seen very clearly here. And I am going to explain these appendages one by one in a short while from now. And in the last class, I have told you what appendages are. So you can mention appendages are small leg-like structures. So from the ventrolateral margin of each segment arises a pair of appendages or limbs. All these appendages are called biramous or typical appendages. In Latin, the word bi means two and ramus means branch. So two branched structures are present, except the first pair, which are uniramus. Again, in case Latin, uni means one and ramus is a branch. And each appendage has a basal stalk or protopodite made up of two joints or podomeres. So you can mention podomeres are nothing but the segments of an appendage. A lower coxa, or it's also called as coxopodite, and an upper basopodite or basis, which is seen in this particular slide. You can have a look at it. Then from the protopodite arises two rami. Rami means again branch, an inner endopodite and an outer exopodite, each of which may be composed of one to several podomeres. The first appendage is not comparable in detail with the others, hence it is because it is uniramus. So you can see the particular slide of the biramous appendage. Fine. So each segment, I told you, bears a pair of jointed appendages and exhibit considerable diversity in size, shape and function, but all are built of a simple biramous type. So and once again, because a question about biramous appendage will be asked in the examination for 1 or 3 marks, you can just say a biramous appendage is a typical appendage. It consists of a basal part or protopodite composed of two segments, namely the proximal coxa for attachment with the body and the distal basis. So the basis bears at its free end two branches, the outer exopodite and the inner endopodite. Fine. This is what you are supposed to write for a biramous appendage, and this diagram actually is that of a pleopod, which is a swimmerate or abdominal appendage, which is taken as a representation of a typical appendage. Next, in Palemon, all the appendages are built on a biramous plan, but they are modified variously. It's because of their different functions. So each appendage will have a particular function to perform, and each appendage has a cuticular exoskeleton, which is divided in most into tube-like segments or podomeres, which are connected to one another by soft articular or arthrodial membrane. Thus, a joint is created at each junction. These joints enable the podomeres of appendages to move. So, it helps in the movement. In each podomere are two protractor and two retractor muscles, which are attached to the inner surface of the cuticle, while the flexion and extension of appendages are brought about by the muscles, with the muscles and cuticle acting together as a lever system. Let's talk about the different types of appendages in case of Palemon. Generally, all the appendages are one of the following two types. The first one being stenopodium, which is a slender limb. Its endopodide and exopodide are set on a common stalk, the protopodide. The second type being philopodium, which is broad and leaf-like with thinner cuticle. The endopodide and exopodide do not form a fork, F-O-R-K, fork. In the previous session also, I had displayed this particular slide to know about the various appendages belonging to three different divisions of the prawn. You can just have a look at it little later. Coming back to the head portion or head region, the division of the body we have mentioned in the last class, that is the body of Palemon is divided into three main regions, where the head, the thorax and abdomen, where you can always say the head and the thorax are almost covered over by means of a dorsal shield called carapace, and they are together. So, of the 5 pairs of cephalic appendages, first two, that is antennules and antennae, are preoral, while mandibles, maxillae and maxillae are post-oral. Pre and post words you are familiar with. So that's in front of the mouth, and post is just behind the mouth. So antennules is the first cephalic appendage. You can see here the diagrams are drawn little later about the antennules. So the antennule is the first cephalic appendage out of the 5. Then the antennules are attached one on either side below the basis of the stalked eye. The protopodide consists of 3 segments, that is precoxa, coxa and the basis, and the precoxa is large, proximally bears a depression containing the opening of the statocyst, that is the organ of balancing, on the dorsal side, and a spiny lobe called the stylocerite on its outer margin. The coxa is short and cylindrical, and the basis carries 2 long many-jointed whip-like feelers. The outer feeler is further divided into an inner smaller branch and an outer larger branch. So coming back to the function of antennules, the antennules are tactile, that is sensory to touch, and also since they bear the statocyst, these help in equilibration, that is balancing. The next appendage belonging to the head portion are the antennae. So here are the diagrams. You can see very clearly the structure of an antennule showing the three divisions, that is protopodite comprises of three segments. I told you, the precoxa, coxa and the basis. Have a look at it little later. The next region is that of the antennae. The second diagram which is shown here is the antennae. These are also paired and lie one on either side just below the antennules. The protopodite is swollen due to the presence of excretory organ within, which opens by a minute renal aperture on the inner margin of coxa. Endopodite is represented by a many jointed feeler, and the exopodite is a broad leaf-like plate called squama or scale. It bears setae along its inner and distal margin, and it serves as a balancer during swimming. The antennae are also sensory in function apart from being excretory, and also possess balancing function. The third figure here is that of the mandible. So as you all know, mandibles are two strong and calcified structures lying one on either side of the mouth. It also consists of coxa, which is differentiated into two parts, a proximal triangular and hollow apophysis, and a distal head. The head forms two processes, the molar process and an incisor process. The molar process bear 5 or 6 dental plates, and the incisor process end in 3 teeth. The head carries a mandibular pulp with proximal segment, the basis and 2 distal segments forming endopodite. The exopodite is absent, and the mandibles are masticatory in function, that is, they help in chewing the food. The fourth diagram here gives you the information about maxillulae, that is, they are also called as first maxilla. These are actually small, thin and leaf-like appendages. The protopodite comprises of coxa and stipes or bases, and the inner borders of which are covered with pointed spines and project inwards as jaws or gnathobases. In fact, G is silent, gnatho, the word gnathos is a Greek term which is nothing but jaw. The endopodite is curved. You can see very clearly in this diagram. Endopodite is curved and bifurcated at the apex. The exopodite are absent. The maxillae, they help in manipulation of food. Finally, the fifth cephalic appendage is the maxilla. Maxillae. These are also thin and flat leaf-like. The coxa is small and bifurcated partially, while the basis is large and forms a bifurcated gnathobase internally. The endopodite is quite small, while the exopodite is a large, broad, leaf-like, fan-shaped scaphognatheid or baler. So the word is scaphognatheid. The movements of scaphognatheid create a water current passing over the gills, and The free margin of scaphognathite is beset with setae. Hence, you can say the maxillae helps in respiration and in manipulation of food. So, the function of maxillae is to help in respiration as well as to manipulate the food. Fine, these are all the cephalic appendages. The information is given once again in the slides followed by it. So, about the antennae, I have already given you the information. Then these are the mandibles. The mandibles are short but stout appendages lying one on each side of the mouth. The greater part of each mandible consists of coxa, which is differentiated into a proximal spoon-shaped apophysis and a solid distal head. The head consists of two parts, a molar process with 5 or 6 dental plates and a flat plate like incisor process with 3 teeth. So, here the outer margin of the head carries a small 3-jointed mandibular palp. Palp is small flap-like structure. The proximal segment of mandibular palp represents the basis of the protopodoid, while the 2 distal segments represent the endopodoid. In mandibles, the exopodoid is absent and the mandibles are masticatory in function. Maxillulae, I have already discussed. These are small, thin and leaf-like. Coxa and bases are broad. They project inwards as jaws or nathobases. Then they are fringed with bristles, small spine-like structures. The endopodoid is curved and bifurcated terminally. It has small hooks. Exopodoid is absent and the maxillulae are used for passing food to the mouth. Finally, the maxillae, with the diagram already you have viewed earlier. These are also thin and leaf-like. The coxa is very small and incompletely divided into 2, while the basis is larger, forming a bifurcated nathobase with stiff setae at its inner end. While the endopodoid is small and the exopodoid forms a large fan-shaped scaphognathite or baler with plumose bristles along its border. It projects into a gill chamber, causing a current of water on the gills. Maxillae have both feeding and respiratory function. So now, after learning about the structure and function of cephalic appendages, let us learn about the thoracic appendages, which arise from the thorax region. So, these thoracic appendages, they consist of anterior 3 pairs of appendages which are called as maxillipedes. Again, it's in Greek, maxilla is the jaw and podas means foot or foot jaws, and posteriorly it has 5 pairs of walking legs or pereiopods. Walking legs are also called as pereiopods, or for 1 mark they may ask, pereiopods are A, B, C, D, etc. they may give. You have to mention pereiopods are the walking legs. So, the first maxillipede or foot jaws are thin and tend to be phylopodium. Their coxes and bases, they form plate-like structures which are called nathobases or endites by its inner borders. On its outer side, coxa bears a bilobed leaf-like epipodoid which acts as a gill. So, you can mention the endopodoid is small and unsegmented. And the exopodoid is larger and bears a thin plate-like expansion from its base. The margin of exopodoid and endopodoid are fringed with setae. The first maxillipedes hold the food and also serve the function of tactile and respiratory organs. The second maxillipede. So here is the representation of maxillipedes. You can see the diagrams which are drawn beautifully and you can easily understand them. I just gave you the explanation about the first maxillipede. You can see how beautiful the coxa, the basis, epipodite, exopodite as well as endopodite is drawn. The second maxillipede is almost like a interrogative mark. So it shows usually. So these have a two-segmented protopodite like the others, the coxa and the basis, which are seen in very clearly. The coxa base, an epipodite and a gill, that is podobranch, it is called as, on its outer margin. The basis carries a long, slender and unjointed exopodite. You can see in this particular slide, which is covered with setae along its distal half and a 5-jointed segmented endopodite. The segments are called podomeres of the endopodite, which are named from base as ischium, merus, carpus, propodes and dactylus, of which the last two bent backwards and inwards and possess cutting margins. The third maxillipede is also clearly seen here. They look leg-like in appearance and have same parts as second maxillipedes. The outer border of coxa base epipodite, while the basis base a long, slender and unsegmented exopodite with setae and a 3-jointed endopodite. In the endopodite, the proximal podomere represents ischium and merus fused. The middle podomere is the carpus and the distal podomere represents propodes and dactylus combined together. So the function being, these maxillipedes take part in feeding and hold the food in position while the mandibles masticate it. Especially for second maxillipedes are also tactile, then respiratory. Third maxillipedes are also tactile, hold food and are respiratory in function because they have got a structure which is lobe-like or leaf-like in their coxa, which is called as epipodite. Coming back to the remaining 5 pairs of thoracic appendages, which are called as Pereiopods or walking legs. You can see the beauty of the legs here. The first one and the second, they are the chelate legs. They are called as chelate legs. Then the third, fourth and fifth legs are called as non-chelate, which I am going to explain in little later. So you can again say there are 5 pairs of walking legs which are called as Pereiopods, and these differ from the maxillipedes in their greater size and absence of epipodites. I told you near coxa lobe-like structures called epipodites are found in maxillipedes, which are absent here in walking legs. So even exopodites are absent. So a typical walking leg consists of a 2-jointed protopodite and a 5-jointed endopodite. All the 7 podomeres, namely the coxa, basis, ischium, merus, carpus, propodes and dactylus, are arranged in a series and are movably hinged together in case of non-chelate legs. So the fourth, fifth, that is here third, fourth and fifth pairs of walking legs are called as non-chelate. While the first and second pairs of legs, that is in this the propodes is prolonged beyond its articulation with the dactylus, so that the two podomeres work one against the other like the blades of a pair of forceps, forming what is known as a chela, chela, or pincer. And such legs are termed the chelipeds or chelipeds, peds, peds, or chelate legs. So these are used to grasp or hold the food and pass it on to the mouth, and also serve as organs of offense and defense. So the second chelate leg in males are larger and more powerful than in the female. Already I have told you the third, fourth and fifth pairs of legs are termed as non-chelate and typical. In female, each third leg bears a female reproductive aperture on the inner side of the coxa, while in case of males, each fifth pair of walking legs bear a male genital aperture on the arthrodial membrane between the leg and the thorax. So the pictures of non-chelate and chelate legs are drawn and shown here in a beautiful manner. You please have a look and memorize the words or the podomeres there. So again the same information, it's just going to be the repetition of whatever I just told you. The 5 pairs of walking legs of Palemon differ from maxillipedes, the absence of exopodites and epipodites, while a typical walking leg like the fourth consists of 2 jointed protopodite and a 5 jointed endopodite. The protopodite consists of short ring-shaped coxa and a triangular basis. The endopodite consists of 5 podomeres. You have to by heart or memorize them. The ischium being the lowermost, above that is merus, next is carpus, the fourth one being propodes, and the final one, the fifth one being the dactylus. So all these 7 podomeres are arranged in a linear series and are movably hinged together. In the first and second pair of walking legs, the propodes is prolonged distally beyond its articulation with the dactylus, so that the 2 podomeres work one against the other like the blades of a pair of forceps, forming a chela or pincer with sharp terminal claws. In fact, the dactylus is movably articulated to propodes. Such legs are called chelate legs or chelipeds and are used to catch the prey and transfer it to the mouth, and also serve as organs of offense and defense, which I have already mentioned to you. And the third, fourth and fifth pairs of walking legs are typical and non-chelate. And even when I discussed about the external apertures of Palemon, I have mentioned about this particular point where you can say in female, each of the third leg bears a crescent female genital aperture on the inner side of its coxa, while in male, each of the fifth leg bears a slit-like male genital aperture on its side of the arthrodial membrane connecting the leg and the thorax. So, after explanation of the cephalic and thoracic appendages, let me move on to the abdominal appendages. So, abdominal appendages are 6 pairs which are known as Pereiopods, and each pair is present in each of the abdominal segments, and each pair is simple biramous type and serve as fins, F-I-N-S, fins. Hence, they are called swimmerets or pleopods. They help in forward swimming and also serve to carry eggs in the female. So, you can even see in this particular slide the information about the abdominal appendages, where you can mention, since there are 6 segments in the abdomen region, they have 6 pairs of abdominal appendages known as pleopods or swimmerets. These abdominal appendages are simple and typical and may be taken as a typical type of appendage, which is called as biramous type. In a typical abdominal appendage, like a third, the protopodite consists of ring-like coxa and a cylindrical basis. The basis bears 2 flattened leaf-like rami or branches, the smaller and inner endopodite and the outer and larger exopodite. From the inner basal region or margin of endopodite arises a small rod-like structure called the appendix interna, with a knob-like head bearing numerous hook-like processes. In the female, during breeding season, the appendix interna, you can see there little later, the structure small rod-like. The appendix internae of opposite appendages, they articulate with each other, forming a series of bridges which serve to carry the eggs, while the outer surface of basis and the margins of endopodite and exopodite are beset with numerous setae. These are the abdominal appendages. Their diagrams are given here. You please have to note down and take it and practice in your notebooks for the examination. Here once again you can mention there are some differences in case of the first and the second abdominal appendages in the 2 sexes. You can mention the first abdominal appendages, in case of male, the endopodite is greatly reduced and the appendix interna is totally absent, while in the second abdominal appendage of male, the appendix interna gives off on its inner side an additional process called appendix masculina, lying in between the appendix interna and endopodite. Finally, the uropod, which is the 6th abdominal appendage. It's uncalcified and last pair of abdominal appendage, and it's quite large and form broad flat plates and lie on either side of the telson. These appendages are called uropods or tail feet. In the uropod, the coxa and basis are fused together to form a structure which is called as sympod, S-Y-M-P-O-D, and the exopodite as well as endopodite are oval and oar shaped, O-A-R, oar shaped structures. The exopodite is broad and larger and is divided into 2 unequal parts by transverse suture. The endopodite is slightly smaller and is undivided. The margins of exopodite and endopodite, except the outer border of exopodite, they are fringed with, that means they are beset with long plumose setae. The 2 uropods with the telson form a fan-like tail fin which causes the strong and rapid backward spring or motion or movement of prawn while swimming. So you can say the function of uropod is to take a backward spring in water. So with this last appendage of uropod explanation, I am almost completing my lecture on the appendages and the functions of them in Palemon. Thank you.